Hi, it's Dennis Daly. I've posted over 100 excerpts from some of my more than 250 American montage shows that I did in the 1980s and 90s while at UPI Radio. Recently, I embarked on a fresh series of shows. We're on the road again this week, this time in Yuma, Arizona, and we're the guests of John and YVONNE Peach, who have owned a motel complex. I say complex because there's a wonderful restaurant next door. The complex is called the Coronado Motor-Hotel. It is the first building of its kind in the state of Arizona to be of the design of a modern-day motel. The motel and the restaurant are chock full of photos of Yuma and the Old West and the story of transportation. I sat down and talked to YVONNE Peach about the Motor Hotel, but more than that, the history of the area and how we all need to preserve history. The first thing I mentioned is that if you look at a map of the California-Arizona border and the highways and everything else, you'll find a lot of traffic funnels through Yuma.
Yes, and then, of course, you had the train. The train, of course, went across the Colorado River. Mm-hmm. That was built... I think the train bridge, I want to say, that I don't want to say because I'm not sure about that date, but the train across the Colorado River was a big deal because I know John's parents came here early 1900s, and they came on the train.
Because if you look at a map, the next crossing up is up in the Kingman area, if I'm not mistaken, and that... Because Arizona is such a tall state, and California, my lord, half again or more taller, it's quite a distance between here and the next interstate.
Right, and the bridge is actually called the Ocean Bridge, and it's a gorgeous bridge, and it has neon lights up at night. It says the Ocean Bridge on it. It has the railroad bridge and that bridge are one and the same. So the train goes across the Colorado River as the traffic went across the river at that time.
Wow. Yeah.
And of course now there's a new highway, but you still can use the Ocean Bridge to get to the to Paradise Casino and to the Indian Reservation and to the museums over on Fort Yuma.
You have done so much to preserve history here. What would you say to someone, regardless of what size city they're in, as to the importance of preserving the past before it's gone?
I'm a firm believer that you have to know your past to know your future. And a lot of people don't realize if you just look at what people used to do or the way things were done, it solves a lot of the problems we have today. I just think everybody should really pay attention to the history. We lose so much that's the reason why I've done the restaurant the way I have, and of course the Coronado too. We've really tried hard to preserve the history of Yuma.
What kind of reaction have you gotten from people who have come into this restaurant and seen what is a museum in itself to the history of the area?
Well, some people say it's a museum and you can eat in the museum. But there's a lot of pictures here. There's probably over 500 pictures of old Yuma, and like I said, we really enjoy preserving history, and so I put it all up myself. I did it all myself.
How did you find the photos? Was there from the historical center, the library? There's an immense number of photographs here.
Well, when we first started, we went to the Historical Society, and the pictures that are here of Robert Fowler, we actually got through the Historical Society, and they were quite costly, to put them up. We had to sign papers on them. And then we contacted Emo Studios, which is the oldest photographer here in town, and he had gotten the studio from the original person. So Emo Studios, we worked with Emo for many years, and we purchased copies of negatives he'd have. And then we found a scrapbook of John's mother's, excuse me. And so when we found the scrapbook of John's mother's, it was really interesting because the pictures were like 1 inch by 1 inch. And so we'd have to take them to Emo, and he'd have to take a picture of the picture to make a negative, to blow it up, to make the 14 by 16 that we have in here. And so Emo's later years, he became blind, and he didn't work for anyone except for John and I the last 3 years that he was in business.
Yeah, what a tribute.
Yeah, and so And of course, like I said, and then he'd call and say, somebody wants a copy of your picture, is it okay? And we say, as long as you sell it to him and you make the money, you know, we didn't mind him selling the pictures.
Well, you know, in the days before 1 hour photo, and it's ironic, you used to be able to get black and white overnight, and color took 2 weeks. They had to send it away. Every little city had a photographer, and he was the guy you took the photos to and came back the next day and got them. You wonder how many incredibly historic photos are in the back room of those old stores, or were thrown away when the guy went out of business and they turned it into a pharmacy or something.
Well, when Emil passed away, his daughter came to town, and she made available all the pictures that her father had ever taken. And anyone that was interested could go down and they could purchase their family photos, the negatives or whatever. John and I did the same. We went down and purchased quite a bit from her ourselves. But we had owned so many negatives already, because we have more pictures than you see here that we have in storage. We actually did the 100 years of YUMA history at the Art Center, and it was supposed to be a pretty good exhibit. And it was all old pictures of YUMA.
Well, you know, you sound like the Smithsonian. I found out when I lived in D.C. that what you see at the Smithsonian is a very tiny percentage of what they have stored in their warehouses.
Well, we always wanted to build the museum on the side of the restaurant here for years. We talked about it, and we looked into grant money, but of course grant money wasn't eligible for us, I guess, because of the hotel. I don't know, but we have a lot, and one of these days I'll figure out a way to display it more.
I think it's magnificent. When did you and your husband take over this, it's almost a little kingdom here on 4th Avenue, of sprawling motel, which you tell me is the oldest in the city that's still in operation?
It is the oldest motel, yes, and it actually, matter of fact, it was the very first motel built in the state of Arizona. The Coronado was. Not just the city, the state. No, it was the state. First motel, you know, where rooms were side by side. And, of course, the restaurant here is where the first plane landed in Arizona, and there's a state monument out in front of the restaurant. But the facility was built by John's parents. They built the hotel in 1938 as the Coronado Motor-Hotel. And then they... And it is interesting. It's motor-hotel. The word motel hadn't really come about yet, had it? No. And I've noticed now a lot more hotels are doing motor hotels, because really that's what, you know, it was. Yeah. But they built the hotel in 1938, and then they were one of the charter members that started Best Western chain. Really? And so that was in 46, and then that's the reason why YUMA Landing is here. At that time, M.K. Girton was a very strong person in having facilities at hotels. And so... now, he was who? M.K. Girton is the one that founded Best Western. Best Western. Yes. We should explain to people that Best Western, 1-800-528-1234, used to be their number. It was an interesting chain of motels because unlike, and I'm not cutting down Holiday Inn or Howard Johnson's, where they're all the same. I mean, you wake up in the morning, you don't know where you are. Best Western, if I'm not mistaken, was individual motels that had to meet a certain standard, that were allowed to use the name Best Western, but that was still the Coronado Best Western, or the Dewdrop Inn Best Western. That's correct, yes. Yeah. But that was in 46, and that was the reason why this was here. We are no longer a Best Western. In July of this year, we are no longer a Best Western. But we feel that the hotel is a beautiful hotel, and we've kept the standards up all these years, as you've seen, staying in the hotel. And the restaurant is still very much a part of the hotel. But Johnny's parents were very futuristic, I believe, because they made sure they had the facility they needed to survive theirself. Because at that time, there was no restaurant on this end of town at all. And as of today, there's no other large restaurant on this end of town. We are the largest restaurant north of Yuma. Yeah, and we take for granted now that unless it's a very low-end motel, there's going to be a restaurant there. Mm-hmm. I know quite often there's a chain out here, is it La Quinta Motel? And there was almost always, at least where I would see these, there was almost always a Denny's next door. Mm-hmm. I don't think they were the same company, but they made sure
in putting up the motels that there was a place to eat.
Well, it's kind of like the survival of a hotel. If you don't have a restaurant within walking distance, most of the customers, they request a restaurant. They want a restaurant when they come back. They want to, you're tired and you don't want to drive anymore and you just want to walk to the restaurant. And so, but anyway, that's the reason why this is part, and our guests at the hotel get a full free cooked order breakfast here at the restaurant in the mornings. It's included. So
I've got something to look forward to tomorrow.
In the morning, yes, you sure do.
I must tell everyone, a lot of these shows, promotional consideration by Yvonne's been very nice, not only to let me sample the hotel, or I will be tonight, but gave me lunch today. I didn't have tell them about the big burger you have, the Crash Landing it's called?
Yeah, we got the Crash Landing. It's 2 burger patties, and it has
you better
cheese.
Pray that no plane goes down out here.
It has mushrooms on it, and it has bacon on it, and it's probably the #1 thing that people buy in the restaurant here.
Well, I just had the plain old cheeseburger. And
Arizona
it took me
burger.
half an hour to eat it. So.
Yeah, that's the Arizona burger, we call it.
What is it like? I asked it indirectly before, but to meet the public, you must have, and I say this pretty knowledgeably because when I have traveled Arizona, California, a lot of foreign tourists, a lot of Europeans. I think there's still a fascination with the Old West in a way.
Yeah.
Tell us about some of the people you've met from outside the country and what their impressions have been.
Oh, we get all kinds of Europeans here. We get we get Germans and French, and we get a big Czech community here too. They
Really?
stay in the hotel, yes. And they love the sun. The biggest thing that they love about Arizona, I believe, is the sun. No matter what country they're from, they want to lay at the pool and they want to get a suntan, so when they go home they can show them that they've been in the sun. But of course they love to study Indians. Mm-hmm. A lot of them are looking forward to studying Geronimo when they're going that way. The Indians here, the Quechans, have a beautiful museum, and they're starting to go there. And we have St. Thomas Mission, which is actually on the Indian reservation also. And so I believe they like Native history. They love Native history.
I don't want to start a debate here, but I watch a lot of documentaries. And how the Europeans who came over here, my ancestors among them, who came from County Cork in Ireland in 1847, suddenly were wrapped up in what a lot of young people have never heard in history class called manifest destiny, which is where we newcomers thought we had the right to take the whole country. And it's really one of the tragedies that we don't talk about very much, that we invaded a continent full of people who had their own traditions and their own form of government and their own religion and their own everything, and we treated as if they were heathens.
That's probably true.
I think that's an easy way to...
Yeah, my family was from Germany originally, I believe. Germany and England. Mm-hmm. And John's family is from the Czech Republic, is where they were from. And so, yeah, you're probably right. I know John talks about how when they came here, he wanted to learn Czech so he could talk to people. And his parents, it was so important for him to learn English.
Yes.
That they wouldn't even speak Czech hardly around him at all because they wanted him to learn English.
Well, a friend of mine in Palm Springs, when the debate of the Mexican influx and the rise in Spanish, and that debate starts, he said, by all rights, we should have had to speak Navajo. Go back to the very beginning. Czech, that's kind of interesting. His family, do you mean then that there was always a small Czech, and I'm using the word ghetto here in the proper sense of the word, that there was a collective of Czechs here?
No, I think when they first came here, John's aunt actually was here first. And later on then she sent for John's father to come out here. I think through time there was I think John told me there was like 3 or 4 families only here in town that was from there. But they all came from Chicago, and there's a humongous community of Czechs in Chicago.
So the modern day Czechs who come here are coming why?
For tourists. They're tourists. They come in.
Do they know that there were some families here? It sounds as if it's coincidence. I thought maybe there had been a huge Czech community here.
No. We actually we actually, how you want to call it, tried to get them to come here.
Oh.
Yeah, and so my husband has connections, and so originally we were just trying to get them to stop in Yuma. They used to not even stop in Yuma. It was like a drive-through deal. And so to change that way of thought and to get people to stop to see what Yuma has to offer is a big deal. And so we worked for many years to get them to stop their tour, because they come in LA, they go to San Diego, they go to Tucson, and from Tucson they go to Phoenix, they go to the Grand Canyon, and then they go to Las Vegas, and then they fly back out.
Fly back out of there.
Yeah. And it was just always, it's always been trying to get people to stop in Yuma and see what Yuma has to offer. And so we finally did work it out with the tour company, and they like it. They spend all day in San Diego. They come in here in Yuma later in the evening, and then they spend some time here the next morning. So they actually, it actually worked trying to convert them to come to Yuma.
Yeah, that's wonderful. I love that. I must say, I want to talk, of course, here about Yuma, but either direction you drive on Interstate 8 has some very interesting scenery. If you go over to San Diego, not only do you go through a very fertile part of the Imperial Valley of California, there's one section of the interstate that kind of looks like going through craters of the moon over there. The interstate splits up and goes through
That's
rocky
the sand dune.
crag. Is that what it is?
Yeah, the sand dunes. You know, I always tell everybody Yuma has the best of all worlds. We're only 2.5 hours from San Diego, so you got the ocean. We're just a little over an hour from the mountains, and so you can go and have the snow if you want. You know, and we're only, 8 miles to Mexico. You think about it. You know, we have a lot here to offer. And so, yeah, it's just, but that sand dunes is where Star Wars was filmed.
Really?
Rambo's been filmed there. A lot of movies have been filmed in the sand dunes.
I know it's a beautiful part of the world. And if I had had time, I would have come down that way, but I didn't. I cut the corner and came down through the Imperial Valley. I've talked to 2 young people since I've arrived here, and they both say they really like Yuma a lot. And if that sounds odd, it's because I come across a lot of young people whose favorite phrase is, "I've got to get out of here."
Yeah, you hear that a lot in other towns. I do hear that a lot, yeah. Now, one of the things between here and the sand dunes is there actually used to be a road across there, and it was called the Plank Road. And there was actually a road that was built with wood, plank roads, that the Model T Ford, or the cars, would drive across those sand dunes before the highway was built. And there's a state monument, that exit right in the middle of them. You take the exit and go to the south, and there's a fenced-in area that California has preserved, and they have a monument there. You can read about the old Plank Road. There's actually pictures here in the restaurant of the old Plank Road.
We'll have to look at those. That's an interesting part of road building. Cars and buggies went slowly enough that you could have a wooden highway.
Yeah.
But I can understand that. Before concrete and asphalt, there was no way to tie a road down through the sand dunes.
Yeah. Well, in the sand dunes, you know, the road moves.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. I never thought about that.
Yeah.
You have, as you say, tourists coming through here, and I guess for those who went on the tour bus from here to Tucson, Yuma was just kind of a pit stop at
Used
one
to be,
time.
yeah, gas stop.
Yeah, until you convinced them to stay here.
And there's so much here. We have the Colorado River. It's just 2 blocks from the hotel here. And, you know, they do float downs now. You know, people talk about going to the Grand Canyon and doing the float down in Colorado. Well, you know, they can do it here and lay back on a rubber raft and float all the way down the Colorado River and get a suntan. It's just beautiful. And we have sandy beaches now for over half a mile. They have sandy beaches here now, which are unheard of in the desert.
And I saw a lot of those ATV dune buggy kind of things coming over here. And well, there's places for that.
Well, they rent them here, too. You can rent them. You can actually rent a pickup and the trailer and the whole thing to go over to the sand dunes.
That's amazing. You know, seeing the Colorado when I arrived here, I realized that within less than a month, I had seen the Colorado 4 different places. I was up at Glenwood Springs, Colorado. Then I was in the Grand Canyon, then at Laughlin, Nevada, And now I'm here in Yuma. So every place I go, I run into the Colorado River.
Well, this is the only, until just recently, was the only national heritage area west of the Mississippi. And now I understand northern, somewhere up north has one. But we have a huge national heritage area here along the Colorado River. We have 2 wetlands projects, the east and west wetlands, you know, for birds, and it's got a hummingbird sanctuary there, and it's just really, really nice.
I noticed that the late singer, Mayor Sonny Bono has a natural area named for him over in California.
Oh, really?
I thought, what did he ever have to? But, you know, he may have. He was quite an outdoorsman. Sadly, I think he hit a tree skiing.
Yes.
Was what took him away from us. Tell me some more about what the foreign tourists say when they're here, the reaction of people who, the West is a new thing for them.
You know, they love the cactus. They're always looking for the cactus. And they like the water. They do like the water. I think it's so different here. They come from a place where it's rainy all the time and it's cold. You think about the way the weather is in Europe, you know, and you come here and they're here for, let's say they're here 20 days. In Arizona, they're going to see the sun probably every day that 20 days. And for them, it's an experience that, you know, they'll get a sunburn. And I feel so sorry for them. They'll be so red. And I'll say, you know, they'll come in, but they're proud. They're proud that they have it. And I always give them a leaf of an olive verde, you know, an olive. And I said, just peel it back, and they'll put it on their skin, and it always makes them feel better, you know. And it just, but they love the sun. They love the sun.
I would think that Yuma has also probably been a big commercial area, trading center. Because in essence, this funnel of bridges across the Colorado here, there's really vast areas on either side where there are no other cities.
That's correct. You know, Yuma is huge agriculture here. We are the lettuce capital of the United States during the winter. If you were eating a head of lettuce on the East Coast in New York City, I guarantee you it came from Yuma.
Came from Yuma? Yeah.
Came from Yuma, yes. We have broccoli and cauliflower. We have kale here now. We have artichokes. They're growing artichokes here now. But there's a lot of produce here in Yuma.
The first time I was ever here was on an airplane. I had missed a connection on Delta, and I looked at the schedule, and I said, I've got to get back to Washington, D.C. There's a plane from Phoenix to Yuma that goes to L.A., that then turns around and goes to Atlanta. And they said, you want to make that U-turn? I said, no, but I'd like to be at work tomorrow. And I remember landing here at Yuma thinking, my Lord, this runway goes on forever. How did you get, what is it, 13,000 feet or something?
Well, my husband said it was one of the largest airstrips in the world for a long time. Of course, now, you know, people have built new ones, but it's number 13 in the world. I looked it up,
Wow.
and it's actually the number 13 in the world as far as longest. And, you know, they have, you know, the Boeing does testing here sometimes for their 747s, and the new one they have the Dreamliner.
I would guess then, like a lot of cities in good weather areas, your current airport is the child of a military base or a military airfield. Is that the case here? Or was Yuma really a pioneer in a lot of ways?
Well, this has always been a military facility here. They had the Air Force Base here. Laguna Air Force Base was here, but they did a promotional. It was actually what do you want to call it? A promotional deal to get the military to come here, and that's the reason why the City of Yuma plane did the fuel. They fueled it, and it flew and it flew and flew for multiple days and actually made history. Was because they were trying to show people how good the weather was here for flying. And they would refuel it while it was still in the air with a car. And there's actually...
Whoa. Refuel it while it was in the air from a car?
From a car.
You better explain that.
Well, it was a group of people. They decided to do a publicity. It was like a publicity stunt.
To see how long the plane could stay aloft without landing?
Well, and mainly to get the Yuma in the news so people could see how good a weather Yuma had for flying airplanes. It was their way of showing people that you could fly continuously here and have good weather. And they were refueling it with the car. The plane itself still is down at City Hall hanging up, and the car, replica car, is down below it to show you. And there's a video down there that actually explains how they did it and everything. But that's how the military came to YUMA. And so we had the Laguna Air Force Base. We have MCAS, which is a Marine Corps Air Station. And we have the YUMA Proving Grounds here.
So the military then ended up making a large contribution to the area here.
Yes, it did. Yeah.
Reason I mentioned about a lot of people inheriting an airport is that during World War II, there were huge numbers of airfields built California, Arizona, New Mexico, Texas, Louisiana, Florida, in those areas where the weather was much better than having one in Wisconsin. After the war, many of them were just closed, and many medium-sized cities really benefited because they took over the abandoned airport and lengthened the runways in many cases, and that's their airport.
Robert Fowler actually landed right here, and it was in 1911, and the runway that he used was actually this 4th Avenue here, and it was a dirt, and it was like a big ballpark here on this hill. And when he landed here, it was a cross-country flight. There's a history of it on the menu, but the townspeople pushed him off the hill to get enough
momentum going
to go ahead and fly out of here. So that was the first, I'm going to say the first air flight, that they had. And then we had Marsh Airfield, which was just below Prison Hill here, where the prison is.
Mm-hmm.
There was Marsh Airfield, and a lot of locals, including my husband, used to fly out of that area. And then if you stay on 4th Avenue here, where the Tropicana is now behind there, was the air base. And that's where Amelia Earhart landed. Yes, she actually landed there. I'm not sure where she landed with the Powder Puff Derby. That part I do not know.
Mm-hmm.
But she was here once for the Powder Puff Derby. But the next time she was here she was doing that cross country on the Aerogyro. That it was a test thing, and she landed in Yuma for maintenance on that helicopter, and that's the airstrip that she landed on. Because I actually used to have a gentleman here. He was about 96, and he always told me the story on how he got to go and watch her when he was a little boy, and how important it was for him as a to him it was his life, but
sure,
he's the one that told me, and he's the one that gave me a small copper airplane that says 1928 that he got from the Powder Puff Derby when she came to Yuma.
Talking to people of that age, I think, is so incredibly important. I mention this almost every other week on the show, in that there is this wealth of information out there sitting around in nursing homes. And those people, no one ever knocks on the door, no one ever says, tell me your story, and they're aching to share their memories, and when they're gone, they're gone.
That's true. I fully believe that. You're right. I sit and listen to stories that my husband tells. I give anything if I would have paid more attention to. He had a lot of friends here in town that they used to have coffee, and they're all from Yuma, and like you said, they're all passed away now, and those stories are gone, gone forever. And you're right, people hold a lot of history within them.
My guest this week, maybe I should say my host, is YVONNE Peach, who with her husband owns, it looks like a little kingdom you have here.
No, it's not a kingdom.
It's the Coronado Motor-Hotel on 4th Avenue, which is the oldest here and the first motor hotel in Arizona, I think you said.
That's correct, yes.
And adjacent to that is Yuma Landing Bar and Grill, Cafe and Grill.
Yes, Bar and Grill.
Bar and Grill. I must thank you for not putting an E on the end of the word grill. For some reason, that's always irritated me. Or did you just run out of room?
No, I didn't know it's supposed to have an E.
A lot of places it does, and I don't like that.
Oh.
Anyway, we're here talking about Yuma and history and preserving history. This reminds me a little bit of a restaurant where I used to go in Milwaukee called Mader's. I could never figure out whether it was a German restaurant or a World War II museum, but it was someplace between there. Let's regroup a little bit on what we talked about earlier, and that is your husband's father had actually started the motor hotel complex, right?
Yes, he did.
What did he do before that?
Well, when they first came to YUMA, John's father was a tailor, and so they actually had a tailor shop on Main Street. Mm-hmm. And John's mother and him ran a motel, or hotel, excuse me. It was called the Van Dome Hotel on Main Street for free room and board. So they got into the hotel business that way. And then a few years after that, they actually leased the Virginia Hotel, which was across the street, and they ran that. But the major thing they did was in about 1928, they bought the old Southern Pacific Hotel, and his parents tore it down. I think it probably took them a couple of years to tear the hotel down, but they used that lumber to build Peach Auto Court, which during that time zone, auto courts were the thing to do, the little buildings, and yes, you drive up to them, and they had a little gas station and the whole thing.
And you say little buildings. Most of them were, they sometimes call them tourist cabins, but that's kind of a cut down from there. They were little bungalows, and they were separated by space where you drove your car in.
That's correct.
So
yes,
it was not the connected kind of motel we're used to.
Right, and so that's what they had built. That was their very first enterprise that they built themselves. But they had gotten used lumber from the old Southern Pacific Hotel to build Peach Auto Court. Well, they ran that for a few years, and about 36, 37 is when they decided they were going to buy this property here, and they bought just a small area of property, and they built the Coronado, and the original Coronado was just the cottage and 14 rooms. That's all it was. But the concept, they put the rooms together. So it was the first one to be built like that, where the rooms were side by side by side. And then they built the house in the middle. And the house had the lobby, of course, where people would come in and rent the rooms. But the rest of the cottage was where John's parents lived. And so they had the living room and the kitchen and the bedroom. And my husband moved to the Coronado when he was 10 years old.
Wow. Now, do you know whether there were many modern-day plans for motels existing at that time in the late 30s, or did they ever talk about how they came up with the idea? Did they see maybe in Denver somebody had done it? Because this is really ahead of its time out here.
Well, I know one thing. I know John's mother loved the Casa de Pico that's in San Diego. That she liked that hotel, and she loved the Hotel del Coronado. So I think she took the combination of those two places, and that's where she come up with the Coronado. I don't believe Arizona had those kind of, concept. And the Casa de Pico is similar to the Coronado as far as the way it's laid out. So she was looking at, I have a lot of old postcards where they would gather up postcards from other states. And so she was looking at other places and other properties and trying to figure out how they could do it better. I do know that one of the successes of the Coronado is it was built with copper water pipes.
Wow.
Which most older properties have galvanized, and it's a mess. And the whole Coronado was built with copper. And my husband always says he believes that's the reason why it's really done a lot better than most, because it was all copper.
See, if you look at Yvonne and her husband's sprawling motor hotel complex, you would not believe that the original part of it dates from the Depression.
Yeah. And what they would do is every 14 years, because I've kind of studied the history of the layout and how the hotel grew, every 14 years John's mother would add 14 rooms. I don't know if she had that from a friend, if it was just her way, or if it took 14 years to make the money. You know what I mean? But every 14 years they added on to the hotel. And then in 1996, John and I pulled a hotel that was the Pikes Motel. It was an older hotel. Best Western wanted to bring it in. At that time, we actually added 35 rooms, and that was in 96. Well, then in 2008, we annexed another property and brought in 40 rooms. It is a nightmare when you don't wait the 14 years. So she knew what she was talking about. And of course, our economy's been kind of bad the last 4 or 5 years too. But she did have a system. And that 14 years, 14 rooms is really probably the way we should have done it.
Well, now, my regular listeners will know I've told this story before, but I grew up in southern Indiana. My dad had brothers in Washington, D.C., and we would go visit them. And before the interstates, it was a 2 to 2.5 day drive. And once some of the interstate was built, we found that there was a motel complex halfway to the mile between my parents' house and my uncle's house called Baker's Motel on Highway 40 in Norwich, Ohio. Well, my mother liked it because Baker was her maiden name, so we made a big deal about this. They built on and expanded, became this massive motel, but they didn't see something coming. The interstate finally came through. No one went down Highway 40 anymore. It's still partially open, I think, mostly for hunters who come through the area. But I was there about 10 or 12 years ago. I pulled off the interstate, went down old Highway 40, and the memories of being 9 or 10 years old and being with my parents and everything came flooding back. And I almost stood there and sobbed at how much of it was boarded up now, you know?
Well, that's one thing. Once you go through the museum at the Coronado Motor-Hotel, it's like memory lane when it comes to when you're a kid. Most of the people that go through the museum say, oh my God, I can remember that as a kid, or I remember that. And so, I think the history is really important to preserve. But when the highway moved here, it affected the hotel. It's always been tough.
I'm sure.
My husband always tells the story how during the war his folks nailed a no vacancy sign on the door, and it didn't take it down for 4 years.
Oh, wow.
Because as soon as they had a room empty, one of the guys already knew somebody that wanted the room. There was such a demand for rooms.
I know in my hometown the best thing that ever happened to the motel industry was for a period of 12 years they built 2 huge electrical generating stations 20 miles away.
Oh.
And there was not a motel room within driving distance of that complex in Petersburg, Indiana, that had a vacancy, I think, for about 12 years. And then, of course, they got both of them finished, and everybody checked out. And now you just wait for somebody to knock on the door.
Yeah, I don't think YUMA's been full for a long time. It's been, they went through the boom where, they overbuild hotels and a lot of hotels.
Yeah, everything goes through cycles like that.
Mm-hmm.
You mentioned agriculture here as being important. What kind of crops? What do you grow here?
Well, they grow just about everything. They grow lettuce, broccoli, cauliflower. We have artichokes here. And then the off-season, they grow cotton. A lot of cotton is grown here. Sudan grass.
I know coming through Southern California to get over here, I saw an awful lot of bales, and I didn't know whether it was hay, but I assumed it was cattle feed. That it was a grass that was being baled up for...
That's probably alfalfa then.
Alfalfa,
yeah,
for
probably
some
alfalfa.
kind of consumption.
Mm-hmm. They're waiting probably for a semi to come pick it up.
I think the thing a lot of people would be very surprised at if they had not been here, or a European tourist for that matter, is the immensity of some of the farm fields here. There'll be a field of lettuce that literally it's as far as the eye can see. And it's all the same height.
I think last year there was 40,000 acres of lettuce here. Yeah, I think that's the figure that I had been told. And they do, we do ag tours here where they can get on a bus and go tour the fields, and then they can actually go and have a meal. They can go to a field and pick the produce if they want, and then the college makes it. I'm not sure exactly all the details on that, so I want to be careful about it, but they do offer that here. And they have military tours now here too. I don't know exactly how they work, but they have a military tour that you can take, but it has to be booked through the YUMA Visitors Bureau.
I've always thought it should be mandatory along major highways that the farmers have to tell you what they're growing.
I think that's a good idea.
Because when I was a kid in Indiana, you could tell corn. I mean, it looks like corn, but when it's little, they would test different seeds, and you would see a sign up that would say some type of hybrid corn, DeKalb hybrid number 286, and then the next field would be number 297. kind of, but you knew it was corn growing. But some of these fields are so incredible, you say, wow, I wonder what they're growing there.
Well, it's really interesting I'd say from about November, from now till January, February, you'll see fields that have multicolors. They'll actually be raising and growing maybe 4 different varieties of lettuce on the same field. They mix, you know, you'll have maybe 4 rows of this kind and 4 rows. It's beautiful. It's absolutely beautiful. Purple, greens, and reds, and it just, from the highway, it's gorgeous.
Well, you answer a question I didn't ask, and that is, the McDonald's, where I regularly eat, used to have a monitor on the wall for the McDonald's channel. Well, it got too difficult to put all the elements in, so the monitor's black now. But one of the things they used to do was to run profiles of farmers. One was a potato farmer, and one was a rancher who grew the beef, but one was the guy who grew the lettuce, and the fields looked striped.
Mm-hmm.
There'd be a red, 5 or 6 red rows, and then green. Now I understand what they were doing.
Yeah, it's a mixture, so that when they cut it, it's the mixed bag that you buy in the grocery store, is really what it amounts to. Because a lot of that is mixed, cleaned, washed, and bagged here in Yuma.
And so you don't have to separate it or combine it. It's already there.
It's already there.
Wow. So your lettuce shows up all over the place.
All over the place. All over the United States, I guarantee you.
I want to talk about some of the other aspects. You have a lot of photos of the railroad here. The railroad predates the highway bridge. I would guess, like many cities, the railroad was incredibly important to this place growing.
I would say very much so. Everything coming on the train. And the highway bridge and the railroad...
they're side by side, right? The two
yeah,
old
on
bridges.
the ocean. But I think the original was a wooden one across the Colorado River.
Ah.
And if you go down, we actually have, it's called the ghost train here. It's a humongous, it's the engine from the train. And it's setting on it's a virtual attraction, you know, where you go and you can hear a train, like a train coming into town, and you can hear the conductors talk. And then you can hear it stop, and you can hear like you're in a train depot.
Uh-huh.
And then pretty soon 2 lights shoot across the Colorado River, and it shows you exactly where the train track was years ago.
Yvonne, over on the wall you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, my goodness, more than maybe about a dozen different types of steamboats. Those weren't all ferries, were they? Did the
No.
Colorado have boat traffic on it?
Well, this was actually the Gulf of California came all the way up here.
That's right. You don't have to go very much farther down the Colorado before you get into the, technically you get into the Pacific Ocean.
Right, and what they would do, a lot of the freight would come up the Colorado River, and then it would go on up to Los Angeles and whatever from here. And all those boats were on the Colorado River. And if you go up to Prison Hill, they have a big water tower there. And if you climb up the water tower, they actually have pictures to show you how large the Colorado River was in that time zone. This is before the Hoover Dam, before the Imperial Dam. So the river was really, really quite large here.
And I would presume in flood season, it must have been terrifying down here.
Well, Yuma was actually 2 different times had a flood really bad here. 1916 was the last flood that was really bad on Main Street. We actually have some pictures here, and it'll show downtown with like 5-6 feet of water downtown on Main Street.
Yvonne, there's a building here that's the Territorial Prison. What's the pedigree of that? How did all that get started? Was there a territorial capital here? I guess it stems from the fact that Arizona was not a state until well after 1900.
It was called the Territory before it was a state. And I actually have some documentation in the museum on that. I do know that they used to call this the Country Club on the River because the Yuma Territorial Prison had electricity and they had running water.
Oh.
And the city people didn't have that. So a lot of the city people here called it the Country Club on the Hill. And so it's kind of got a little...
So if you want to have plumbing, get yourself sent to prison.
But I mean, that was kind of the joke at the time. But yeah. There's quite a story on the prison, too. You know, I don't know the particulars on it. I don't want to say because I might be a little wrong. But there's quite a story on how there was a big meeting somewhere, and originally it was going to go somewhere else, and somebody moved the marker and moved it to Yuma, Arizona when everybody went out to lunch or did something.
Isn't that funny? You know, I think we forget the accidental nature of boundaries and cities. I was at the Four Corners a couple of weeks ago. And here you have 4 states meet because surveyors drew lines, figure out who owned what, and they just happened to cross there. And except for that little American Indian village, a trading post, a little plaza, and a marker on the ground, there ain't nothing else out there.
There is nothing there, but
No.
just think of the thousands of people that go there to see.
Oh, I know. I did a stand-up there on camera, and that's one of the things I mentioned. There must have been 60 million photographs taken here. There was a young girl from France who was a ballerina, and she was out dancing on the Four Corners.
Well,
And I didn't have my camera going, but I could just think, she goes back to France. I went to the American West, and I danced on the Four Corners.
Well, I actually have a story about the Four Corners when we get to the museum at the Coronado Motor-Hotel. When John was a little boy, his folks went to Four Corners, and they were up there. And at that time, I guess the Indians would set along and sell stuff on the road.
Now they have built the stalls built in a semicircle around the monument.
Okay, well, this was just there, you know. And so John's mother wanted to buy they had these beautiful Navajo bags that had been weaving, you know, with the handles on them and all. And there was a set there. And there was a set of 3, large, medium, and a small. And they were $12.95. It had the little tag on them.
Back then.
And John's dad said, "Oh, no, that's too much money. You can't, we're not going to get them. It's too expensive." John's mother really wanted them. Well, he went to the bathroom, and while he was gone to the bathroom, she bought them and put them in the trunk of the car. And so when I first came to the hotel and I was helping John clean out storages, I ran across these bags, and they were brand new. They were brand new, you know, just beautiful, just in mint condition. And I said to John, "Where did these come from?" And he told me the story, you know.
Oh, that's funny.
And the little tag is still on them, and they're actually on the shelf in the museum, but they're hand woven.
Neat, yes, very much so. YVONNE Peach, I want to compliment you and your husband because you have, in a little corner here in Phoenix, done more to preserve the history of this city than a lot of cities have done in their museums.
Yeah, we feel like we've preserved a lot of the Yuma history.
Let me let you wrap it up one more time by asking you a question I asked earlier to expound on, and that is, even if a person is in the smallest little town, there's got to be something historic there, something they can find and preserve.
In any town, there is something to be preserved. It can be as small, you know, people don't realize what history is, and sometimes it's just the littlest thing that we take for granted. It could be as small as greeting cards that your grandma has in a cardboard box, to some bottle that she has sitting in the kitchen cabinet that looks different than the others. And that's the thing people need to realize. When they go throwing away stuff, I always tell people donate everything. Don't throw anything away, because another man's trash is another man's treasure.
I did a show one time with a woman named Vera Rosenbluth. Now, if her name had been Diane Dahl, I never would have remembered it. But Vera Rosenbluth, she was the queen of scrapbook making.
Oh.
And wrote all kinds of books on scrapbooking. And she said that's the thing about it. A lot of people think it has to be an old car or an urn or a 1911 toilet or something to save. She said if all you have are photographs and letters from your grandmother or a picture from the Civil War, put it in a scrapbook and give it to your grandchildren.
Well, you know, when I first came to the hotel, my husband didn't like old things. He was totally against old things. I am the old person that likes the old things. And when I first came, we'd go through his mom's stuff. You know, he was always throwing away his stuff, and I was always taking it out of the trash, you know. And so through years and through time, when I kept changing stuff and all, he always says to me now, he says, "I'm so glad you don't throw everything away."
YVONNE, this has been great fun. Thank you for your hospitality here and for inviting us to Yuma here.
You're welcome. Thank you.
If you're a regular listener to American Montage, you probably know I'm kind of a stuck record when it comes to pleading for historical preservation, if you're old enough to know what a stuck record is. But I'll tell you, of the many places I've visited, I don't know any city the size of Yuma that has the kind of cheerleader that this city of Yuma has in YVONNE Peach, who is working hard to preserve the past for the next generation. From Yuma, on this week's American Montage. I hope you enjoyed this interview from my new American Montage series. Check out YouTube for more. I'm Dennis Daly.